men's good and the best.
I'm sorry I missed the question on sports. And one was whether we intend to provide a world-class sports stadium. It says that we don't have a world-class standard sports stadium. We've been to several countries. We've gone to watch matches. I've been to Wembley before, and it's a stadium of a different class from what we have here. And often countries are energized to build this stadia if you bid to host something. It creates the opportunity because you know that you will get returns on the investment when the tournament comes to your country. And so I remember when we bid for the African Cup of Nations, some rehabilitation of stadia took place, but we didn't see any new world-class stadium built. In the current crisis in which we are, I would not stand here and promise that we will build a new stadium, but I've said that under the big push, we intend to spend a certain amount of money over 5 years on providing a good infrastructure to include roads, bridges, agro-industrial parks, and so on and so forth. That could include sports facilities, and if we make allocation, then we probably would look at providing such a stadium. And so that's what I can say. Sports, if you go to many countries, sports plays a very good part in the 24-hour economy. And so you find games being played at night under floodlights and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, here in many places, we have to close the match before the sun goes down. Otherwise, there's not enough light to continue the match because we can't even keep the floodlights on. And so I do think that as part of the 24-hour economy, sports can play a very good part, and we'll invest in sports facilities and help the people engaged, the private sector engaged in sports facilities, to be able to provide, service at night so that our people can enjoy that service. During the working day, people go to work and things. In the evening, they want to go witness a football match or go witness an athletics meet. And we don't have exactly the facilities to sustain that. And so it's something that we will think about. Minyanu bisa say, "Ede importi ena eye bibi fofora. Yebetimi ede ensa atoso say we adia ebetimi asesa nyoma ama ye shebre Ghana for shebre asesa." Na em say enyoma bebre amaka no. Makacho said the central plank of your economic policy initially is to stabilize the economy, and only the priority, because maybe tokromu ayakoshe no e was say yetimi eye na yetimi epie free tokronumu ansa na waka bibia ka ho and America said 24-hour economy no eno ebebie economy no sene be ya enkwada no benye adwuma ye mabunu no benye adwuma ye, because national security aka say the major threat to your stability in Ghana is youth unemployment. Abraham Miwabemu, now unemployment rate a little over 8%, and net unemployment could do 14.7%. And we share Ghana statistical standards, Ghana statistical service on more reports now. HSS things will deteriorate further, because World Bank say 800,000 people have fallen below the poverty line just because of economic crisis a year from we. Another Ghana Statistical Service report say 8 million of our people ended that back because they couldn't afford to eat. 8 million people did not eat for one day because they couldn't afford food. The major emergency I was say food inflation ever from. And the only way we can do is say yan kasa eduane a yedi no e wo say yan kasa yedua wo ha na yetwa na yenkrofo timi nya food at affordable cost. Enti saa nyoma ni na e ya de a metimi aka say ye be ya e be ma nyoma asesa amaye. na osan bisa say aba enyoma enkrofo afa anase omawia che say eye oman na japade a omonkwan omo afa no ye be ne den em se makan obebi bebre na nu ya mekola na lafo no omusu because o masasi bebre a abanje ye se ede ye bibi ene maye mo adwen se mo mfa nye biom na emra ne kire se wo se wo mfa nye wo mfa asase ne nye ade a wo gi ye nti wo mfa nye biom a e wo se wo ma asase no esan kọ nia ode asase no ma o ene ye ka say la wireless make I say President Kufuor FAB 40% EDC African Union Village because now ye be ye African Union Summit or ha inti na ka 60% of la wireless land ene ko hokoshe ya che asase nafa without consultation with the stakeholders. Make I say Abra Professor Mills by International Students Hostel near Chedi in Afa. Professor Mills by or just asase no back and a hona foreign ministry AC sa asase no so na foreign ministry wo enti se wafa abaya japade e wo kwan so a emra no empene a yebe san a repossess on behalf of the people of Ghana enti I know a commitment I try say me ye atrem. Will I still give amnesty to people convicted for Galamsey? And my answer is yes. Because those who are in prison for Galamsey are not the actual perpetrators of Galamsey. The big kingpins are not in prison. Those who are in prison are the small boys that they employ to work on their Galamsey concessions. And so they are victims of circumstances. And so if we are coming with a new fight against Galamsey, let's start by giving them amnesty. Let's bring them out, reform them, and do the things that will make them not go and do what they've done again. If somebody must be in prison, it's those district chief executives and ministers and others who are doing the Galamsey, not the people they are employing. The term of Bank of Ghana governor used to overlap the political season. It's a 4-year contract, but it depends on when the governor is appointed. And so if you remember, the last governor who was a governor in my time was Governor Isaku Nashiru. When I left office, Nashiru's term was still running. It was the same with Governor Akwa. His term overlapped government. It is only when Nashiru was forced to resign and a new governor was appointed that the term is becoming conterminous with the political season. But otherwise, really, it just says you have a 4-year contract. After 4 years, the contract is renewable. And so if a government comes into office and your contract has not expired, you continue as governor. And when the time comes and your contract is over, depending on your performance, your contract will be renewed. But if you are a governor who presided over a 60 billion loss, I wonder if you expect a contract extension. If you're a governor who printed 42 billion CDs and pumped it into the economy, pushed inflation to 54%, I wonder if you expect that you will get a contract extension. If you're a governor who in crisis decides that the best thing for a bank to do is to invest $250 million in a headquarters building, I don't know if you should have the expectation that your contract will be extended. And so I think that, yes, 4-year contract, but it must be based on the performance of the person or the individual who is in that office. Cabinet reshuffles are important because they enable you to bring fresh pair of hands into your government. And then somebody might not be performing in a certain sector. But if you reshuffle him and move him to another sector, you find that he finds his feet and performs better. So from time to time, a president might look at his cabinet and shift people around or drop some people and bring new people in. It is something that happens all over the world. We were advocating for the reshuffling of the finance minister, because from as far back as 2019, we could predict what was going to happen. A finance minister comes into office and all he knows is to borrow on the international capital markets. And not only because that's all he knows, but also he benefits from the borrowing. Conflict of interest. His company, Data Bank, anytime government borrowed, received commissions on the borrowing. And so that was an incentive to borrow. So is it any surprise that in 6 years, this finance minister borrowed $13.5 billion from the Eurobond market? With all the projects and infrastructure I invested in my time in office, the total amount I borrowed from the Eurobond market in the 4 years was $3.5 billion. In 6 years, this minister had borrowed $13.5 billion. And that is what has put us in the situation in which we are. And if even that money had been put into productive use and infrastructure, we will not be sitting here and lamenting about this country. But most of that money went into consumption and into dubious projects that have brought no return to this country. And so if the president had reshuffled him earlier, we will not be in this mess that we are. MPP has very capable people. The only reason the president kept him in that office and refused to shuffle him is because he was his cousin. So kaputting the economy, you then remove him, and then you say, I should clap for you. I won't clap. I won't applaud him. He should have done that much earlier. Oforiatta should have been out of that office in 2019, not at the time that he made him leave. And so I think that's my comment on that. Increasing districts. That is part of the expenditure government has to bear. Bernard, unfortunately, it is provided for in the Constitution, and unfortunately, it has been misused by governments. A lot of the time, the motivation for splitting districts is to create additional constituencies. And so you find that districts have been split and become unviable because they are too small and do not have economic opportunity to be able to be viable as a district. There are many districts today whose only source of income is District Assembly's Common Fund. And so unfortunately that is what has happened. I remember when I was a deputy minister, the districts were under 100, about 90 districts or 70 districts or something like that. Today we have 261. And there's no scientific basis for the division except gerrymandering. Because there are districts that are bigger that should have been divided, that are not divided. But districts that are smaller that should have been left as they are have been split and created into smaller districts, because then the party that wins in that district can have two constituencies instead of one. So that is the case. Several districts that existed, constituencies that existed have been converted into districts. So in looking at the review of the Constitution, we must set some more stringent guidelines for the creation of districts. You know that now every traditional area wants a district. And so we're getting to the stage where every paramount chief wants his traditional area to be a district. Because I go around and traditional paramount chiefs are requesting districts for their traditional areas. That's not what it was meant to be. But if you look in the Constitution, the creation of regions is specified, and you must go through a process that requires consensus building. Unfortunately, it's not the same with districts. With regions, you must have a commission of inquiry, and the Commission of Inquiry must recommend, and when it has recommended, it must go for a referendum. 40% of the people in that region must vote, and 75% of them must say yes. And so if we do the constitutional review, we probably must look at making more stringent the creation of more districts, because if we say it's just based on population and land size, where are we going to stop? Ghana today is 33 million people. It is predicted that by 2050 or 2030 something, we'll be 50 million people. And so if you say population is the driver, then by the time we are 50 million people, we'll have 600 districts. And so that is a major issue, and I agree with you that we should look at that. But I think that there are more opportunities for improving funding to districts. And one of the things that has been forgotten is the issue of property rates. If we collect property rates properly, we can raise money to improve social services in the districts. And so even though AMA has been split up into other districts, I mean, just look at the houses in Accra. Just look at the properties in Accra. Bernard, do you think that if these properties rates are collected properly, the districts will not have enough money to do the drains and do the roads and do everything? So one of the things we're going to do is to support the districts and enhance their capacity to collect their property rates. Because District Assembly's Common Fund was introduced, property rates are not collected the way they should. My father died and left his house. One day I got a frantic call. Bra John, come. They've come to paste a notice that they're going to sell the house. So I go there and I look at the notice. It says, what do they call it? Distress something, and that if we haven't paid, and so we're supposed to be taken to court, you know. Meanwhile, I said, but where is the property rate bill? We hadn't received property rate bill for almost 5 years. And so they had put the address there of the place where we should go. So I went there and I said, oh, you want to sell my father's house? And I don't know, we haven't received any bills. And the man said, oh, your bills, which one is that? The Tesano, He said, the bills are here. You haven't come for your bills. Oh, I should come for my property rate bill. He says, your bills are here. Look, you haven't paid. Of course, I don't want them to sell my father's house. So I collected the bills and I wrote a check for them. And that ended the story. But I'm saying that we must support the assemblies to be able to give out the bills timeously and collect the money. And we must value those properties properly. I mean, some of those properties, if you charge 5,000 cedis a year, I mean, they'll be willing to pay because the value of the house is worth millions. And so that could be a new source of funding for district assemblies. Accra is getting difficult to manage because of its size and population. And so the city is spreading beyond its limits. It makes it difficult to continue to provide social services to the city. And so I propose that we look at establishing a new city so that we can move some of the agencies out of the city in order to reduce the pressure on Accra. Can you imagine if Nigeria had not built Abuja today? Lagos would have been in gridlock. You will not be able to even walk in Lagos because it would have been shut down. So I said we must start thinking about creating a new city and moving some of the agencies and departments out of the city. But of course, we must connect the two cities with good transportation networks so that people can go back and forth. And aside from that, it gives us an opportunity to plan that city better and ease the gridlock in Accra. It is not an immediate project. I said I envisage that it will take about 20 years to complete, but we must start somewhere. And that's why I said we'll start the feasibility and planning in the 4 years that I'm president. Other people will come and begin to implement. And we have the opportunity because the Volta Lake and the river are there. There will be access to clean water. We can make it a smart city. where the services are provided. There will be no kiosk and containers littered all over the place. We'll provide markets so that if you want to go to the market, there's a properly organized market and everything. There are supermarkets, there are schools, there are parks for recreation and all that. We can even make it a tourist center. We can create amusement parks so that families can go there and have amusement. We can have a water park. We have no water park in this country where you can go with your family and have a nice time. And so I've envisaged that if we start towards it, we might not live to see the end of it for some of us, but our children and our children's children will benefit from the establishment of a new city like that. Will you review the IMF policy? We will not cancel the IMF policy. It is a policy that our government has signed on to, and they signed on behalf of government of Ghana. Indeed, when the crisis was reaching epic proportions, we actually asked them to go to the IMF for support, because this economy was going to crash, and it would have crashed with severe consequences. And you remember, we will not go to the IMF. We will not go to the IMF today, tomorrow, or as long as we remain in power. We will not go to the IMF. We will not go to the IMF. Eventually, we told them that if you don't go to the IMF walking, you will go in an ambulance. And they ended up there in an ambulance. And so the conditionalities are more stringent than if we had gone earlier. And so, yes, we've landed in the IMF. We will work with the IMF. There are opportunities in the agreement for tweaking the agreement in some ways, not cancelling it. And so, as a new government that comes, we immediately have to sit with the IMF, look at the conditionalities that we're giving, and see how we can tweak them to suit our present circumstances. Things are clearer now, because at the time they signed the IMF agreement, the debt restructuring had not been concluded. Today, it has been concluded, even with the international bondholders. And so we have a more predictable trajectory about how our loans are going to have to be repaid. Even this year, we're supposed to pay $400 and something million of the debt. I don't know where government is going to get that money. We probably will use some of the money the IMF themselves are giving us to pay for it. And that will create problems for the city, because we don't have the kind of injection of foreign currency that we should have. I'm committed to the affirmative action bill. The last time I met with the Speaker, I urged him to make sure that he passes it in his term as Speaker, and that the women of Ghana will be very grateful to him if he's able to pass the affirmative action bill before the life of this Parliament ends. Historically, it's one of the bills that has lasted the longest under consideration. And I think that the time has come for us to have an affirmative action bill. That one and the amendment to the Citizens Bill to allow our dual citizens to participate even in a greater way in the administration of this country. And so that bill too should be passed. The dual citizens should be amended to allow dual citizens to be able to participate. Those two bills are pending before Parliament, and I urge the Speaker to make sure that he passes them before the life of this Parliament ends. General elections, yes, I remember under Charlotte was saying, she announced that their website had been hacked, and so they should continue compiling the ballots with the manual system. And that's why we have a manual system and we have an electronic system. The electronic system makes tallying faster, but it does, even though it goes ahead and makes it faster, the manual system must also conclude before the elections are declared, because eventually the pink sheets are the name of the game. And so in 2016 and 2020, I wouldn't blame the Electoral Commission completely, because the electoral process affords us certain instruments and levers to be able to police the poll. And I must say that, unfortunately, our preparation in terms of using the processes the electoral process affords us to police the poll were not effectively used. I can tell you we've learned the lessons from that time. And this time, it is going to be close marking. We're going to put the right people at the polling stations. And for those of you who are NDC supporters, we're asking for volunteers. We want to know which polling station you are voting in. We'll train you. and on that day you will sit there for us. So those of you media people who are NDC supporters, I beg you, give us your names. In the morning you won't go and vote and go away. You vote and sit at your polling station. We would have trained you, and you'll be our agent there to make sure that the right thing is done. We're going to man the collation centers. We have trained our people who are going to man the collation centers. They will be there. In some cases in 2020, agents in the collation center went and they said, oh, the returning officers have not come yet. So you go home and go and eat and rest and come early in the morning. By the time they came early in the morning, the result had been declared. And of course, it led to confusion. And you remember that some people were killed by that incident. And so we are going to take advantage of the levers that the electoral process offers us to be able to police the poll. So I can assure every Ghanaian voter who votes for the NDC that your vote will be protected. I can assure you of that. Ho Airport is currently not functional, but it still gives us the opportunity for medical evacuations and emergency flights. And so several times I've seen the Air Force, land there for one reason or the other. Unfortunately, Passion Air started flights into Ho, but the demand was sluggish, and I'm told that on one flight they had only a single passenger. And so it was not sustainable at the time. But I don't think we should give up. I think that commercial flights will resume to Ho if people see that time is precious, and instead of driving that length of time, 3 hours to Volta region, you probably are better off just flying 20 minutes and arriving on time. And so I do think some things can be done. But I also know that a group is intending to set up a pilot training school at the Ho Airport of international standard and bring student pilots from all over Africa and Ghanaian students to train as pilots. That will be a useful use of the airport. There are many ancillary activities that we can do, like aircraft maintenance. We can put aircraft hangars there so that aircrafts that need maintenance can come there and maintain. And so it will still be a useful facility, and we will encourage the private sector to make use of it. After all, we've built the facility, and so we just have to encourage and entice the private sector to take advantage of it. And the final question was on Ada Songo Lagoon. I don't know the processes that were used for the award of that concession, but I think that is something worth looking at. I know that there was resistance from the people, and a journalist in the local media station was brutalized and harassed, and I hear he eventually died. And so it's something that we should look at. What processes were used? What is the effect of on the livelihoods of the people? Because that has been a very controversial issue. I remember that there was a company before, Vacuum Salt, that did the same thing. There were run-ins with the people, and eventually the PNDC had to come in and streamline things. So I really don't know what has happened in this case, but of course if we come, we'll take a look at it and see what amelioration is possible in that regard. When I spoke about taxes, I was told that I was not very clear. There are some nuisance taxes. I thought that when I mentioned COVID levy, you would all have assumed that I said we'll take the COVID levy off. We are the only country that is still punishing our people for a pandemic that has passed. And so I think that there are other revenue sources that we can use other than the COVID levy. Aside from that e-levy, with all the noise that was made, the revenue that is coming in is 1 billion cedis. And why would you punish people who want to use electronic means of payment only to bring in 1 billion cedis and prevent them from doing so? And it hasn't brought in the required cash because Ghanaians are cashing out. Because why should I go and use Momo to pay? I pay a 1% transaction fee, then I pay another 1.5% COVID levy. So I pay 2.5%. But my colleague who uses cash to pay does not pay any tax. And so I'll also cash out the money from my Momo wallet and I'll go and buy what I want. And that is why e-levy is not performing. And so if we want people to use more cashless transactions, and I think that we must build a target for ending collecting of cash. You know, all government payments must be cashless, using electronic forms of payment. And if we're able to do that and take the punitive taxes off, I think more people would use it. And so I've said already that we'll abolish e-levy. So that's something that we intend to do. And so the nuisance taxes, we will take them off. And apart from that, like I said, we'll streamline the taxes and we'll make sure that we're able to spread the tax net. We've always talked about it, but this is the time for us to take action. The other time I was wondering, I have a house, people come and service my air conditioners. If there's an electrical fault, somebody comes and repairs it. A plumber comes if there's a fault with the plumbing system and all that. And it's a cash economy. I pay them with cash. And I wonder, who takes tax from all these people, all these workmen, all these artisans? At least they must pay a small percentage of that so that they also are bearing the burden of the tax net. And so if we can find instruments to be able to reach those people, probably pass legislation that makes it compulsory that if somebody like that comes to work, he must be registered as a qualified plumber or as a qualified electrician, and to be registered, you must have an electronic payment handle, either a POS or a mobile money system. You must have a means where if you pay him, a small percentage of it goes into the tax net. That will bring more people into the tax net. But these are ideas that we are still distilling, and the details of it will be in our manifesto when we launch in August. You will see the meat and the issues that are captured in that manifesto. I thank you very much.
Hello, sir. Omaru's question on whether or not you scrap the office of special prosecutor, and Kwekwe Uzeje says he didn't get your answer on what you would do for the customers of the collapsed banks and Men's Gold. Claire.
I answered on Men's Gold, but the collapsed banks, I said that we'll restore the licenses of banks that were unjustifiably taken. You see, the significance of that whole thing is that those banks that were closed were the banks that held the investment of indigenous Ghanaians in the banking sector. Before, most banks were foreign banks until we encouraged Ghanaians to enter the finance and banking sector. And a lot of people like Dr. Undum, Dr. Kwabena Dufo, Heritage, and all those other banks that were closed put their monies in, got licenses, and UT Bank and all of them. And they run successful operations. You see, those banks were the banks in the riskier end of the market because they were the ones doing SME lending. And SME lending is the most risky part of the banking sector. The foreign banks lend to big customers, the Unilevers of this world and big customers like that. And those lendings are not risky because the establishments are known and they know that they'll get their money back. And so you could expect that definitely the banks that were working in the SME sector, which is the riskier end of the market, will have liquidity problems based on bad debt and all that. But the answer was not to clean them out, shut them down, throw more than 10,000 banking professionals onto the streets, and incur a debt of 25 billion Ghana cedis when you could have resolved the matter with less than 5 billion. Because the reason for which they were closed was that they should increase their reserve requirements to 400 million. And so if 10 banks were closed, 400 million is 4 billion. So why couldn't Bank of Ghana give liquidity support to those banks, put them under administration, and make sure that they pay down the equity every year until they are able to repay the liquidity support? It was done in the case of, I think, the Bank of Scotland also. The British government knew the bank was going down. They gave them a liquidity injection and took equity in proportion to the liquidity they gave them. Today, that bank has fully paid. It's one of the strongest banks that you can find in England. And so I think that there were other ways we could have solved this problem without this knee-jerk action of just closing those banks. So I've said that we must restore indigenous investment in the banking sector, and we would give back the licenses of those whose banks were unjustifiably taken. There might be financial implications to it, but we must be prepared to bear those financial implications, because when government does wrong, it must restitute. And so I think that these are things that would look at with regards to the banking sector. Apart from that, not every bank must be a Class A bank. And so you can't say every bank must have a reserve ratio of 400 million, because they lend to different segments of the market. There are banks that are lending to small communities, and their reserve requirements should not be 400 million. Why do you need 400 million to establish a bank that is catering to a certain segment of the market? And so we'll have a tiered banking structure. For the small banks, Class C banks that lend to the SME sector, 80 million cedis or 100 million cedis is enough for them to operate. For the medium scale banks, 200 million cedis, 300 million cedis is enough for them to operate. And then for the Class A banks, the big banks, we can raise the reserve requirement even higher. So I think that is what we need to look at.
OSP, will you scrap it or not?
Why would I scrap the office of the OSP? I won't.
Thank you, sir.
It is an addition to our anti-corruption fight. And indeed, the people who set up the OSP office today are the ones trying to remove the special prosecutor. And they are the ones who are insulting the special prosecutor more than anybody else. And so the special prosecutor is doing his job. And I expect that if we remove political interference in his work, that office can be more, efficient. Today, cases that the special prosecutor took up, I mean, one cannot understand what is happening. You see what happened between the special prosecutor and Yoko. The docket has been sent to Yoko. Yoko said we haven't received any document, and all that and all that. And so the case has been left to die. Today, the $1 million something under the bed case is effectively dead. And don't think that it died because justice prevailed. It died because of political interference. Another case, PPA, went to court, and the judge ordered the unfreezing of the accounts. The day he ordered the unfreezing of the accounts, the next day all the money was withdrawn from the accounts. And so we need to create an environment where the special prosecutor can work and work on behalf of the people of Ghana. And so I will not scrap that office. I will strengthen that office to be able to investigate those who are leaving office, who have been harassing the prosecutor, and also investigating my people who will fall foul of the law. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you will agree with me that what has happened in this auditorium this evening is historic. 2 hours of questions and answers.